it's been a really long day, so bear with me. Hopefully, I'm not going to talk about sports at all. I'm not going to show that diagram. It's going to be completely different, so hopefully it'll be entertaining for you. So I tried to get a catchy title for my talk to give you a hint of what I'm going to talk about. So it's how to get politicians to talk to them and then actually get them to listen to you. So that's the title of my talk. Okay, so what brings me here today to talk about this is this particular case right here. So in June of 2018, Paul Dorian and myself were approached by Allan and Debbie Corrins about their son, Alex. So they lost their son, Alex, in 2006 to a sudden cardiac arrest event. He was an elite hockey player. He collapsed on the ice, and they did everything right. They used an AED, did CPR, and unfortunately, he didn't survive. So after that happened, they found out he had ARVC. They found out it came from the mom, and since then, they're pretty amazing people. They've made it their life work essentially to create awareness, just like the boys have over here, about sudden cardiac arrest. And so in 2012, they put forth this bill, Bill 81. And essentially, if you know anything about anaphylaxis legislation in Ontario, essentially the anaphylaxis legislation means that all teachers are legislated to know about anaphylaxis. They have to train in how to do it every single year, so it's legislated. So in a similar way, they wanted to do the same thing. They wanted to have it legislated that all teachers would be aware and know the signs and symptoms of sudden cardiac arrest in young individuals. So this bill actually made it to pass the second reading. It was going to the third reading. Unfortunately, then Dalton McGuinty prorogued Parliament, and then that was it. And then they didn't get anywhere with the previous Liberal government. And then as soon as Doug Ford was elected, they approached us and said, we want to try again. So we had some discussions with them. You know, we said, this is, you know, education and awareness is really important, but why don't we widen the scope of this? You know, why don't we also look at teaching kids how to do CPR and AED training? So this is I don't know if any of you are aware of this. This is a really big movement in Europe. So it's called Kids Save Lives, is the campaign. So Europe is really, they're light years ahead of us in terms of this kind of campaign. And the idea behind it is that we really want to prepare, you know, students and children to be able to help with a sudden cardiac arrest event. You know, they could save the life of a child, a teacher, or a parent. And how I try and pitch it to politicians is that we're trying to create a generation of lifesavers by putting CPR and AED skills in the hands of all students. You know, and we really consider this to be an essential life skill. So just how you learn how to swim, you learn to ride a bike, you should really learn how to do CPR and AED training. So as I mentioned, the Europeans have done this very well. So Denmark is sort of the prime example of this. Back in 2005, as one of sort of 5 different initiatives they did. So they did a campaign awareness, they instituted CPR and training in schools, they also tied it to driver's license. And what they showed essentially was a doubling of bystander CPR over a 10-year period and a tripling of survival. So there's evidence, probably not the best evidence, but to show that this is actually a very effective way to create a generation of people who are going to go out in the community and actually help. So basically that was June. Then we spent probably about the next 9 months doing environmental scans. So wanting to know what was going on in Ontario. You know, does anything like this exist? So what we found was that it is actually mandated in the grade 9 physical health and education curriculum. And I just want to point out what's in the box here. So 224 pages is the curriculum document. This is the one paragraph that's devoted to CPR. And if you'll notice, it actually just talks about how you can do CPR without proper equipment. And there's no mention of an AED anywhere. Okay, so do you think that most grade 9 physical health and educators are going to actually pay any attention to this and actually implement this properly? My answer would be no. To be honest, actually, I find this is really offensive. I find it extremely pathetic that this is what, you know, the government is saying, like, oh, it's mandated, and this is what they're mandating. So it's been mentioned, can we get some data on schools? Do the schools have AED training? Do the schools have AEDs in them. It's very difficult to do right now in Ontario because of all the labor disruption that's been going on. The teachers basically do not like our government. And so I approached them last year. There's an Ontario Principals Association. I approached them, would you do a survey for me? Would you send this out to all of the principals so I can get a sense of, what's going on? They said no, but we're having a one-day meeting. If you give me 6 multiple choice questions, I will do it at the meeting. And basically all 31 of the English public schools representatives were there. So this is my snapshot of data, the only data I have about Ontario schools. So the first question I asked was, to the best of your knowledge, do the schools in your district have AEDs? So you can see out of the ones that actually answered this question, most of them said, yes, we do. So then I followed up with, if there are no AEDs in your districts, can you tell us why? So lack of funds was one, not surprisingly. And then I'm glad to know that not that many people actually said don't see the need for one. The next question was, to the best of your knowledge, do the schools in your district require some or all of your teachers to have CPR AED training? And for the most part, they answered yes, most do or some do. So that was pretty good to know. So then if training is not required, what would be the issues? And again, lack of funding. And the good thing for me was lack of time was not a big issue, because I think that for me would be the hardest thing to fix would be lack of time, but lack of funding is potentially solvable problem, right? So that to me, this was good news. It wasn't time, it was just a lack of resources. And then this was the question that I was really invested in was, to the best of your knowledge, do the schools in your district train students in CPR and or AEDs? And so you can see some do and a lot don't. So this is what I've been bringing around and showing all the politicians and saying, this needs to change. And then what was the reason why? Again, lack of funding, really, so that's a solvable problem. And then lack of time, again, was not an issue. And so I asked, so I didn't really get any of the others or what was the feedback, but I did ask the president, did anyone say anything? And he said, so the high schools, they're mandated to do this, right? They have the AEDs, but the interesting thing was that the elementary schools were actually, they wanted the same thing. They were like, this is not okay that just high schools have AEDs. We want that training. We want those AEDs as well. So I also found that very reassuring that, there is an appetite out there in the education system to get AEDs and to be trained. So in terms of our Ontario experience, we were told there's sort of 2 different ways we could approach government to make changes. And essentially what we're asking for with the government is we would like CPR and AED training to be mandatory in all schools. So there's a top-down approach, is to get the Minister of Education on side, because he has the power to make this happen. I've been working for months to get a meeting with him, and basically just in the last 24 hours had some really good news that actually might happen. But so we've been working all angles, and I think if you're going to try and do this, you need to work every single angle you have. And so the other thing we've been doing is the bottom-up approach. So we have our group is called CARE, and that's our new logo that, again, I just got in the last 24 hours. I'm really proud of it. But our group is essentially of researchers. There's a ton of parents who have lost children to sudden cardiac arrest. We have survivors. We have paramedic organizations. The CCS has kindly said they support our initiative, CanRock, everyone. So, trying to get this grassroots level approach, we ask everyone, email your MPPs with this template email, and I'm happy to share any of the resources that I have with you guys if you're interested, and ask them to have a meeting. And so far successfully, we've met with at least 10 different MPPs, including the Speaker of the House. We've met with both opposition parties, and potentially we're going to hopefully meet with the minister. So these are sort of the different approaches you can take. And so just to kind of show you a timeline of where we're at. So in June 2018 is when we officially sort of formed our group. We started it. I think it's important, if you're going to do this, we came up with a name for our group. We came up with a logo. We have a website. I think it's good to make yourself seem legitimate so that you're not just a bunch of people going up to the ministry. We spent probably, as I said, about 9 months doing an environmental scan. I think it's important to do that, to know what's going on in the context of your province. You want to try and, is it still working? Okay. You want to try and get as many of the invested parties as possible, because we're all working towards the same goal. We shouldn't be working in silos. We should all be combining our forces and working on this together. So in terms of our first approach to government, it was as simple as I emailed my own MPP. I asked her for a meeting. 2 days later, she got back to me. It was originally just going to be a meeting with their staffers. So you always meet with staffers first. You don't usually meet with the MPP first. But it ended up, she actually brokered a meeting for us with the Ministry of Education. And that was our way in of being able to explain what our ask was. And since then also, as a side project that Paul Dorian has been spearheading, we've been actually having meetings with the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Health, and she's decided to go ahead and to put forth a private member bill on developing an AED registry. So ideally what we're hoping, and then the last piece, another thing that we were told is very helpful to do is, at least in Ontario, you're able to book an education session in the legislature. So not-for-profit groups are allowed to go in. You invite all the MPPs to come and then sort of do your thing. So we're holding an education session in December. We're going to invite all of the MPPs and essentially do this big push to say, hey, you really need to do is just changing the curriculum to make sure that proper CPR training is done in all schools. Anyways, and that's sort of my talk and what we've been doing. Thank you.